Good to have you back. This is Environmental Intelligence, episode 58 for July 17th, 2026. Your Environmental Intelligence briefing. Wrapping up the week with the environmental developments you need to know heading into the weekend. BC and Simpcw First Nation signed consent agreement for Yellowhead copper mine environmental assessment. British Columbia entered a consent-based decision-making agreement with Simpcw First Nation for the Yellowhead copper mine review. Nature Climate Change published findings on offshore wind planning to reduce impacts on North Atlantic right whales and on asymmetric water flux recovery from tropical forest restoration. Practitioners should monitor the mine assessment process and review the marine species trade-off framework for any East Coast wind projects this quarter. If you only note one thing today for your compliance calendar, review project-specific Indigenous consent requirements for any current or proposed mining environmental assessments in BC, with no stated deadline but ongoing tracking through the provincial registry. British Columbia and Simpcw First Nation executed a consent-based decision-making agreement for the environmental assessment of the Yellowhead copper mine proposed by Teck Metals Limited. The agreement establishes joint provincial Indigenous oversight of the full EA process within Simpcw. Prior practice relied on standard consultation timelines under the BC Environmental Assessment Act without formal consent gates. The change requires proponents to align project design, baseline studies, and mitigation commitments with Simpcw requirements before proceeding to subsequent permitting stages. Consultants preparing submissions for similar copper or base metal projects must now budget for additional Indigenous technical review cycles and potential redesign of water management or tailings plans. Next steps include monitoring the joint review schedule and confirming whether the agreement triggers additional data collection under BC CSR Protocol 1 for aquatic receptors. The agreement applies to the full review process and requires alignment with Simpcw technical and cultural criteria before provincial decisions advance. Proponents must now integrate these requirements into baseline programs and effects assessments for any work in Simpcw territory. A study in Nature Climate Change presents a quantitative framework for siting offshore wind while minimizing impacts on critically endangered North Atlantic right whales through noise reduction technologies and spatial planning. Results show that targeted mitigation achieves substantial conservation gains at low additional cost relative to total project capital. Canadian practitioners assessing East Coast wind projects should incorporate the framework when evaluating Fisheries Act and SARA overlap with construction noise thresholds. Another study in Nature Climate Change uses satellite observations to demonstrate that forest gain increases evapotranspiration moisture and precipitation more than forest loss reduces them, with clear asymmetry across South America and Africa. The findings indicate restoration can recover hydrological function in some regions, but not uniformly. Risk assessors evaluating land use change projects should apply region-specific recovery factors rather than default CCME water balance assumptions. Consider a proponent who submits a project description for a copper mine in central British Columbia and receives the standard 30-day screening response, yet the file is immediately routed to a parallel Simpcw technical table rather than proceeding under the usual BC EAO timeline. The consent agreement creates a dual-track review in which Simpcw staff evaluate the same baseline data packages against territory-specific criteria for water quality, wildlife corridors, and cultural use before any provincial adequacy determination. Experienced assessors recognize that the agreement effectively inserts an additional effects characterization step focused on cumulative impacts from historical mining rather than project-alone effects. The practical difference appears in the level of hydrogeological and geochemical modeling required. Simpcw reviewers routinely request particle tracking runs and source term sensitivity analyses that exceed the minimum BC CSR Protocol 4 expectations. The most common mistake is treating the consent agreement as a procedural overlay that can be satisfied with a single consultation report. The fix is to embed Simpcw data quality standards and indicator species lists into the initial work plan so that subsequent information requests do not trigger schedule delays. If you're working on mining environmental assessments in British Columbia, review the Yellowhead consent agreement text for implications on baseline study design. Update internal templates for Indigenous engagement records to capture joint review milestones under consent-based agreements. Monitor the BC EAO project registry for Yellowhead-specific data submission deadlines. Brief clients holding mineral claims in Simpcw Takaraka territory on the new consent gate requirements before advancing to pre-application stage. Track any public comment windows opened under the Yellowhead consent agreement process in BC. Review final comments due on any CCME technical guidance documents scheduled for July closure at the federal level. Prepare Q3 groundwater monitoring programs for sites potentially affected by current wildfire activity across multiple provinces. Confirm laboratory capacity for any expanded analyte lists arising from new mining EA terms of reference in BC. In the next briefing, watch for updates on the Yellowhead review schedule. That covers today's environmental intelligence. If you found this useful, share it with a colleague who needs to stay current. We'll be back with the next briefing, and if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network, links in the show notes. Quick tip from the network, try Fascinating Frontiers next. The most fascinating news from space and science. Every NARA Network show is free at naranetwork.com. Want the written briefing with source links? Each show keeps a summaries page on naranetwork.com. Scannable, dated, and free. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.